All right, it's 5 past. People have had time. We are going to start. So let me start with my little, little, let's go. So in many situations, I know that you've lived through this because you are interpreters. The speaker just keeps on speaking, right? And I know that you know what I mean. The speaker can go on for 5, 10, 15 minutes, and you cannot miss a name, a number, a date, a turn of style, anything about the tone, anything about the intention, and about the register. Everything has to be recorded in your memory and also needs to be in some way recorded in your notes. You've all had this situation happen, I'm sure, where the speaker just keeps on going. What you're going to have to do is learn how to take notes. I know that many of you, please don't think that I'm talking down to you. I know that many of you have been interpreters for decades and have degrees in interpreting. But I'm going to also be speaking to you as learners because that's what we're here to do. So you need to be able to take enough notes to remember everything and give all of these things, name, numbers, logical arguments, every color, every description. And what can happen is that you will amaze your clients. What you want is them to have you back. And what you also want is just to be a great professional. But behind all that, of course, you want to get a good income for yourself and for your family. You want to have repeat customers, people who say, okay, she did an amazing consecutive, she got everything, she has to be in our next meeting. And you want to be able to charge the high price because you are in high demand. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself now. My name is David Violet. I am a conference interpreter and a trainer and coach in the San Francisco, California area. And I have been giving a class in classrooms about note-taking, and recently it's been online. And here I am with my picture. I'm also a member of IEC. And I should have perhaps mentioned earlier that this session is recorded, but I never show anyone's face or their voice without first asking permission. Some of you have already received emails from me saying, hey, can I put you in this recording of a course? And everybody has always said yes, but you can say no. You can use the chat to ask questions. I'm alone running this, and sometimes I may not see the chat all the time. You can also just open your microphone. Please do keep your microphone off. For example, right now, just not to keep the background noise down. But when you want to talk, you can just at the right time, just as if we were all in one room, you can open up your microphone and say, "Hey, David, I got a question." Please stick around till the end because I do have what I consider to be a precious gift. It's actually something that I value very highly, and it's I think that you'll like it. It's not that gold thing there, but it is actually related, and I'll tell you why it's related at the end if you're interested. So let's take a look at why you're here and why we want to learn consecutive interpreting with notes. Can somebody maybe come forward and say, why would you want to learn consecutive interpreting with notes when you probably already do simultaneous and you probably already do sentence by sentence consecutive? Somebody have something to say about that? How about Miriam? What would you say?
Well, there are a few reasons why you want to learn consecutive with notes. One of them is that you might want to take an examination to work for an international organization, and some of them require that you take a consecutive test. So that might be a very good reason. Another one is that you might do consecutive when your clients ask you to, but you're not very happy with your delivery. And so you want to learn it properly. You want to have a method, a structure. You want to know where you're going with your notes, if that is possible. But you want to equip yourself with the best technique available. And the third reason I would mention is that it gives you a competitive edge. Not everybody knows how to do a good consecutive. And some colleagues might refuse contracts, especially if they have to go on stage or they have to perform a consecutive interpreting in front of a wider audience and not just with some customers they're comfortable with. So these would be the three reasons I would put forward.
Those are excellent.
Sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
a last one, but that's a bonus. If you do a good consecutive, it might improve your simultaneous because you learn to analyze, you listen differently. So it might help. I think it does actually.
Well, Miriam, you should be a teacher, and I think you probably already are. Anyway, you've hit most of the points that I'm going to make myself. First of all, you need to know consecutive with notes because you run into all kinds of situations where the speaker does not stop, does not remember that there's an interpreter, or doesn't care. He thinks that the people who don't understand his language are not important, or perhaps it's all been planned that way. All people is going to give a long speech and the interpreter is going to reproduce that speech. Pedagogical reasons, as Miriam so rightly said, you need, well, I think you need, and many pedagogues think you need, and the school where I went to, you had to do a year of consecutive before they let you go into simultaneous, because the theory goes, and I believe it's well-founded, that when you do consecutive, long consecutive 5-10 minutes, you are forced to, if you do it properly, you are forced to adopt the actual process of interpreting. That is, you listen, you understand what the person was really trying to say, the impact, the style, everything. And then you're forced to sort of forget much of the words and what was the form clothing that message. And you find words in the target language that express exactly that message. So you're forced to do what some of us would simply call interpreting rather than doing word for word, which the beginner does. And in simultaneous, we are tempted to do because we still hear the source language word ringing in our ear just a few seconds later when we have to convey that meaning. Of course, good simultaneous is not like that, but attaining good simultaneous is helped a lot by doing good consecutive. And then the third reason, as Miriam rightly said, is that most, in fact, as pretty much all major international organizations will have a 5 or 8 minute consecutive as part of their test to put you on their roster of freelance interpreters, or possibly to hire you as a staff interpreter. And not just international organizations, the courts and other entities will often administer a consecutive exam with notes. So those are at least 3 reasons to learn consecutive. We like to emphasize here the idea of deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is, if I'm going to a job and I do my day-long job interpreting, of course that is a form of practice. But let's compare it to a couple of basketball players. One of these players likes to go and play for a couple of hours. She plays hard, has a good time, and of course that's a great practice. But the other one does what we're calling deliberate practice, where it's much more methodical, it's more thought out, it's more planned. And what are the components of this when this basketball player plays and practices? Well, first of all, she's focusing on a skill. She may go and say, okay, I've already figured out from the feedback I got last time that my jump shot from the right side of the court has a very low percentage of making it. So I'm going to do 100 shots like that, and I'm going to have a friend under the basket telling me, okay, you were a little bit too far to the left, a little bit too far to the right. You got this percentage, and so giving me feedback. That's what the basketball player is doing, and that's what we do. We do a consecutive, and then somebody gives us feedback, and the whole idea also is to, as you've already seen, she's chunked it. She's not just playing basketball with all the skills mixed together, which is what we do in our final performance, but she's singling out specific skills. on the basis of the time before, all the times before, when she realized, okay, this is where I have a weak point. So you chunk it into activities and then devise exercises. One of the major points of deliberate practice is feedback. Feedback, monitoring, self-monitoring, etc. You can monitor yourself. You can have a colleague monitor you like we do here, or you can have an expert. You can have a coach, or if you're in a teacher university program, you can have it. You can get monitoring from your professor. You find out what your strong and weak points are, and then you devise exercises. So here you can see sort of a triangle that shows what kind of frequency. You should probably have all of these types of monitoring going on, both some kind of coach or expert or professor, maybe giving you feedback once or so a month, maybe a colleague doing it once or twice a week, and then maybe yourself, recording yourself, watching your recording, no matter how painful it is, and determining, have I improved? What are my weak points, etc. So, and that's what we're doing here. When we do our consecutive with a colleague, we sit down, 2 or 3 of us, listen all to the same thing. If we haven't got a recording, maybe one of us will give a talk. Best is a talk that's been prepared ahead of time. And we all 3 or 2 will take notes. And then one of us will do an interpretation while the other 2 listen and write on top of their notes, perhaps in another color, comments about the interpretation. And the whole idea is to give feedback, just like the friend under the basket is saying, okay, you missed a little bit too much to the right, a little to the left. Your colleague is going to be saying, okay, what you missed this and you missed that, and this is something you need to work on. So this is a little guide about how to critique. When you're listening to the interpreter, please, in your own notes, write on top of what you took the first time when you listened to the speech, what your comments are going to be. If the person says something that you think was wrong, please write verbatim what the person said and you think is wrong, because it's not very fair to say, hey, you said something wrong here. I can't remember what it was. Okay, that's better than nothing, but try to write it down so you can really tell the person exactly what he or she said, and be ready to explain also, okay, it's before this, before, after that, so that the interpreter can find it in her notes. Also, I'd like to say that you listen as with 2 ears. It's a way of saying, it's a metaphor for saying that both you listen just like somebody who did not hear the original. You say, well, if I hadn't heard the original, I don't think I would have caught this point. Okay, so you're sensitive to our clients, what they would be hearing, because they can't hear the original, they can't understand it. But also you're going to listen with that second ear, which is that of somebody who does understand the original and can give feedback on that basis. So first of all, this empathy with the client, know how the person feels who can't understand the original, and give feedback on that basis. And then, of course, expert help by a colleague who has understood the original. We're going to take a look now at how you would proceed with this feedback. First of all, be kind and useful. The whole idea is to help the person figure out what might have gone wrong. Often you can tell what was going wrong by, you notice in your notes that maybe you had the same kind of problem. So try to be helpful and try to do a bit of the diagnosis with your colleague. What might have gone wrong? Start with the general impressions. Let's see if it was smooth, whether it was not longer than 80 or 90% of the original. Your interpretation should be shorter because you are not finding your way. By the way, I should add, you should always practice with speeches that are off the cuff, not written. If you see a recording and you can tell the person is reading, it's usually not a good idea. People who are reading just have a totally different way of expressing themselves. And so anyway, people who speak off the cuff are finding their way, sort of like I'm finding my way right now. But as an interpreter, you know the way, and you're able to cut out the hesitations, the tics and things. So in theory, you should be able to do it in a shorter time. You should pay attention to this. This is something that I neglected in my first year, and I had to do a second year all year long of consecutive. You really need to be pleasant, holding attention, smooth, and it's a performance, and this comes later. In the beginning, we're hesitating, we're stopping, but with practice, you need to reach a point where it's fast, it's pleasant, people enjoy looking at you, and they do look at you. The person who just gave a speech does not want the people listening to the interpreter to be bored and looking at their telephones, or maybe even leaving the room because the interpreter is struggling, doesn't look sure, etc. It has to be a good, smooth, pleasant performance. Try to use eye contact. That will help you. Not only will that help people be interested in what you're saying, it'll help you because you will feel their need to understand. So when you are giving that critique, yes, I said the first part is sort of an overall impression, and then the second part is we're going to concentrate on substance. Try to pick out 3, 4, 5 major points, if there are any, of substance. When we say substance, we mean the content. We mean the actual information. It's the whole, the dates, the names, everything, the arguments, the links, the descriptions, all the information, the message, because it's different from the form. The form is when you say, okay, you got the information, and I think the listener understood the information, but there's a better way of saying it. Please always maintain, as interpreters, these distinctions in your minds. This is going to help you all through your career, and especially when you're doing critique and doing interpreting. So we are going to go on and actually do an interpretation. We're going to split this into a couple of parts. We are going to do one as a large group, as sort of a demonstration. We'll listen to a piece, and then we will do another piece, which will be, we will be broken up into breakout rooms in 2 persons per room, and you'll all have a chance to interpret and to give feedback on the basis of this first demonstration. Are there any questions or comments on that? Because you guys are expert interpreters, and maybe something's not clear. Anything needs to be said about this? Everything good? If you're anxious to get going and do an interpretation, be put on the spot and have everybody watch you. And okay, we got to get used to that. There's a performance aspect, there's a stage fright aspect, and it's by doing it in front of a lot of people that you overcome that. Although I must say, I don't think you never ever really overcome the tension and stage fright and fear that you have standing up in front of a bunch of people, although you do get used to it. So let's move on, and I'm going to do a sound check. Please get out your notepads. Always have a couple of writing utensils, always at least 2. They tend to conk out at the worst times, and you want to pick up the second one. And I'm going to tell you, actually, this is going to be a talk. It's actually the same one as yesterday, but we were not able to actually listen to it. It's about a guy, Rutger Bregman, who is a Dutch historian who has a theory about how everyone should have a guaranteed income. And this involves a lot of philosophy. Like, when people say, oh, yeah, sure, you give everyone, $1,000 a month, and what they'll do, they'll just sit on they'll buy drugs, or they'll just buy alcohol, or sit on the couch and eat potato chips and watch TV. And so that's part of Bregman's main argument, is that, well, actually, no, that's a misconception that people are so lazy. We should look at evidence. And so I'm doing this partly to make this more realistic, because in fact, whenever you do your work out there in the real world, you will have a chance to think about what the subject is and what's going on. But I also am recommending that when you do your practice, do a little bit of brainstorming beforehand to prepare yourself. You can't just do anything out of the blue. So what would you expect from this? Just to get our minds on track? what would you expect this to be about? You don't need to pull up words, although there may be some technical words. Anybody have some theories?
I think he'll talk about the advantages of having a guaranteed income. He will try to pitch it.
Okay, good. So right, that's great, because what you've just done is you've categorized this speech. It's going to be persuasion, right? He is, sometimes it's a congratulatory speech. Somebody wants to congratulate somebody for an honor, or a speech could be a thank you speech, or a speech could, and we're not just doing speeches. I'm using the term speech for any utterance. It could be a witness on the witness stand. It could be technicians just giving a technical description. But you've given us a good clue there. Yes, it'll be something about persuasion. He's trying to persuade people. Anything else? Oh, I have the volume on maximum. I'm really perplexed. But so what we're going to do, because the way it was put earlier is, it's true. Interpreters cannot be dedicating all their attention to trying to figure out what's going on. You can't do a decent interpretation. Apparently, some of you are able to hear pretty well, but it needs to be good enough for everybody. So what I'm going to do is give a talk myself, and this is the kind of thing that used to happen to me all the time when we were students. We would come with prepared talks or recordings, and we realize it's just no good or something. So it's a good idea to have something in your repertoire. Have a set of presentations in your mind that you can use. What I'm going to do, therefore, is going to give his talk for him. I know that you can hear me pretty well, right? Okay, so here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here. This is a wonderful conference. And I would like to know how many of you watch the news every day. I see some hands going up. I see that many of you are watching the news. And how many of you feel that you are brainwashed and led to be somewhat crazy by the news? Okay, I see that there's one person out there who's admitting that. What I would like to submit to you the following. The news is not newsworthy. It's not broadcast, and it doesn't happen if it's representative of actual life. So if you have 999 people walking down the street, being perfectly civil, going to work, being courteous and excellent citizens, and you have one person who is breaking a window and stealing something, that will be in the news. The crime will be in the news. So when you turn on the news, whether radio, TV, or whatever, and what you see is a person breaking a window and stealing something, this is going to be part of your perception of reality. Yes, intellectually, you know that this is news because it's a little bit unusual, but does your entire subconscious, does your perception of the world take that fully into account? I think actually we're getting a skewed perception of reality when we watch the news. Let me give you another example. In the 1980s, airline accidents were much more frequent than today. They've made enormous progress. The airplanes would maybe airplane crashes out of, say, 10,000 flights were about 10 times more frequent in the 80s than they are today. The result is that in those days, when there was an accident, it was frequently not reported at all because it was seen as nothing particularly newsworthy. Whereas today, when airline accidents have become 10 times more rare, it is reported. And so what happens when we watch the news is that we subconsciously or consciously conclude that airplanes, or we might, sort of feel that airplanes are dangerous. Whereas in the 80s, we would not get that perception because there was no news report about airplane crashes. And reality was exactly the opposite. Airplanes are safer today. So that's why I'm asking why many of you, are you aware that you're going crazy? Because crazy means mentally ill. And what is the basis of mental illness? Mental illness is when your representation of the outside world does not match what's actually happening. So if you hear voices and there's actually no voice, that's a form of mental illness. If you see things that are not there, or if you are paranoid, for example, and you have beliefs about people wanting to do you harm, whereas they do not want you, have no such intention to do you harm, that's a form of mental illness because your representation of what's happening does not actually fit what's happening. So that's mental health, is when it does. And so I would say that watching the news will tend to make you a little bit crazy. And the way that it makes you crazy is actually quite harmful because it portrays all sorts of negative, violent, bad things. So it is creating a belief in you and in millions of people that people are worse than they really are. Let me tell you another story, and it's in my book called Humankind, about, well, another book. It's called The Lord of the Flies. This is an extremely famous book. It was actually, it's been read by school kids all over the world. It's the story of some children who are marooned on a desert island, and they are left to their own devices. They end up in conflict. They end up ganging up on one poor guy, and they are cruel and they are terrible to each other, and they actually end up killing one of the boys. Well, I, Rutger Bregman, I decided, well, but is this actually realistic? And so I started looking around, and what do you know? I found that there is the actual history of 7 boys who were marooned on a desert island for 1 year. And so I thought, hey, here we can compare reality with this fiction, the fiction that has been read by millions and millions of people. And what do you know? These children who were marooned on an island near Australia actually got along extremely well. They were highly organized. They ended up actually building a fire and maintaining that fire for an entire year. They built a little gym in their camp area. They had a system for collecting water, and they even had a system for settling disputes. If there was a dispute, the 2 boys fighting would have to go to opposite ends of the island and come back and greet each other courteously the next day. So what do you know? Reality, evidence, is saying the opposite of what the fiction said. And when you look at this fiction, well, actually the author, and I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, said, and I quote, "I understand the Nazis because I actually am of that sort." Well, what do you know? The author of the book, read by millions and millions, which, by the way, has created a lot of assumptions about how people are bad, and therefore you would say maybe they would take their $1,000 a month and just use it to for bad effects, we are consuming fiction and news that's telling us things that are the opposite of what evidence tells us. In other words, that people, a great majority of people, are productive and courteous and civilized. And I will now stop my talk because I think it would be time for interpretation. Now, I'm going to ask for a volunteer. And remember, when you volunteer, you have the enormous privilege of practicing for the big day when you are in front of the UN jury or the State Department jury or the European Union interpreters all staring at you, looking very threatening, and they're going to judge you. You get to practice that. So I encourage you to volunteer as hard as it may be. Any volunteers? Okay, Dragoslava, I see that you're volunteering, correct?
Yeah, I'm going to try.
Wonderful, thank you. That's courage. Now, everybody.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Dragoslava, I'm just going to interrupt you for a sec.
Yes.
Everybody else, please try to now implement what I recommended earlier, which is that you look at your own notes. Best is to take another pen with a different color, and as she goes through, note how you might help her out by saying, what you said was this, and write it down verbatim. But what I heard is that. Okay, so get ready in case you are going to be doing the giving the feedback. Okay, excuse me, Dragoslava. Thanks for waiting.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to be here at this conference and talking to you. I have a question for you. How many of you are watching news regularly? I see some of you are, actually many of you are. And so tell me, how many of you feel brainwashed, feel like you're going crazy? Just one? Well, I submit to you that news is only what is newsworthy, not what is actually representing life. You can have 999 people walking around, being courteous to each other, civil, being good citizens, and one of them would be breaking windows and behaving badly. So which one will make the news? Of course, the one who is committing a crime is going to become newsworthy. So we will see on the news people breaking windows and stealing, and we will be led to believe that that is reflecting reality. Because your perception is going to get skewed. You may know that it is not a reality, but seeing it is going to change your perception. Here's another example. In the 80s, the airline safety was much less than it is today, and there were many more airline crashes. There were about 10 times more airline crashes than right now, which resulted in not every one of them being reported. So today, when it is 10 times more rare that an airline crashes, we will hear about every single crash. That may lead us to think that airline security is worse today than it was in the 80s, and it actually is quite the opposite. So what makes you crazy? What is the definition of being crazy? That is when your inside perception of the outside world is not matching the reality. If you hear voices, if you see things, if you believe that people are around want to harm you, that would make you feel crazy. So watching the news with all the bad things happening can be considered that it is making you feel crazy. That would be really harmful for you, because it shows the world in negative ways. It shows violence. It shows people behaving badly. So that is going to make you believe that people are actually worse than they really are. I'm going to talk about my book, Humankind, in which I am talking about another book, a very famous book. I forgot the name of the author. It's Lord of the Flies, which is about some children on deserted island left alone for a while, and it ends up in conflict. They are cruel to each other. They are harming each other. They actually end up killing one of the boys. So I, Rutger Bergman, was interested to see if this matches the reality. So I looked around in history and found a real example of 7 boys being stranded on an island for a year. It was an island near Australia. Now, this is history, not fiction. And the boys, turns out, got very well organized. They actually were able to make a fire and maintain it for a whole year. They organized the gym to keep themselves fit. They organized how to get the water. They even had developed a system for resolving the dispute. One of the offenders would be sent to another part of the island, and then when he comes back, he would have to be courteous to everybody else. So that shows us the reality. The evidence we find in reality is actually proving opposite to the fiction of the book I spoke about. But when you look at the author of that fiction book, which again, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, the author said that he understood the Nazis because he actually was one. So what we have here is the author has created a world where because he believed that people are bad and will waste the money, which evidence shows us exactly the opposite in reality, that people in such situations will be productive, they will be behaving in a civilized way, and they will treat each other in a courteous manner. And that's
Thank
where
you.
I end.
Thank you, Dragoslava. Thank you very much. Thanks for your courage. And we will comment on who would like to give feedback. And again, I'm going to summarize. I'd like it to be in 3 parts. First of all, a general impression. Were people interested? Were people listening? Were people going to stay and catch the whole thing? Was Dragoslava actually doing interpreting or doing some kind of word for word without understanding? That's point number 1. Number 2, were there any major points of substance that you could comment on which would enable Dragoslava to improve either her note-taking or her listening or her presentation skills? And then number 3, you can talk about form. The reason we talk about form last and try to minimize it is that as interpreters, we've always been working a lot with language and form, and we tend to brainstorm and end up in discussions about words, which is okay. But what we're doing is actually trying to dig into the process of interpreting and note-taking for interpreting. So we separate the 2 out and sort of try not to spend more than, say, 20% of the time on, the nicer way to say things or the correct way to say things. Although that is important, I'm just saying it shouldn't dominate. So number 2 was substance. Point out points of substance, and then number 3, especially if you are someone who's got a mother tongue in the target language, you can help the person find the best ways to say things. That's what we're calling form, number 3. Okay, so who would like to try to apply that method and give some helpful feedback? Put yourself in her shoes. What would you want somebody to tell you about, to improve, to do even a better interpretation next time? Anybody? Any volunteers? No?
David, may I?
Yes, is that Rifat?
Yes.
Did I
This is
pronounce your
Rifat.
name? Rifat, okay, I pronounced your name correctly? Yeah, okay.
Perfect. So I, having no experience in consecutive or seminar level interpretations, to be amongst you, such experienced, highly esteemed people, I feel really blessed. I just wanted to be courageous to say, just try it out, to give feedback. So first of all, I think Dragoslava, you did a great job, and I hope I said your name correctly. Your substance was great. The meaning, I think the message was clear. And your form, I was listening to David and you. I think your tone and the deliberation was excellent. However, I just, as a beginner, as I was also taking notes, because for me, note taking is what I am being trained on. So this is highly important for me. And just 2 points. I think one was, and of course you got a lot more than I did. I was following David's SVU on my notes. I think David mentioned the word in the example safety, but you used probably security. I might be wrong. So safety is a technical term. He was talking about the airline accidents, but security could mean the, you know, these days terrorist attacks and all that. So I'm not quite, this is, I heard probably David meant safety meaning accidents, but security might be a different term. And then one other point was, David mentioned each of the boys were sent to 2 locations of the islands. And I believe you said 1 boy was sent to another island. That's all. Those are the 2 points I could add. Other than that, I think it was great.
Thank you, Rifat. That's beautiful. Thanks very much. I'm going to now comment on the feedback itself. First of all, Rifat, that was excellent. You inverted the order. It doesn't matter that much, but you started with a matter of form. But as an A, you can help her. I think you have an English A, is that correct?
What's that?
Well, never mind. Where
oh,
are you?
English. Oh, say that again. Sorry.
Where are you from?
I am from Bangladesh. I was born in Bangladesh, but I'm
Bangladesh.
here for the
Okay. I
last
thought
30
it was
years.
India. Okay. Anyway.
No, not India, Bangladesh.
Sorry. You made an excellent distinction between safety and security, which in many of these other languages are thrown together, like in French or Spanish. Sécurité, seguridad can mean both of those. So that was a good distinction, but it was a matter of form. And what I do is recommend putting that last and minimizing it. But you know, you found something, and there's very little to find, so that's great. The thing about the boys now. So of course, Dragoslava is able now to think about this. Hey, okay, that's true. There's not quite the same safety and security. I'm going to remember that. That's the whole idea behind what we're doing here. You want to bring out things, and you know, it's just like when you learned your foreign languages. You trip, you fall, and you figure out, okay, that didn't work. Why? And then the next time you do it right. So that's what we're doing here. Now,
Can I just interject for a moment?
Sure.
What may affected me is the fact that the same word is used in my native language for both safety and security.
Right, that's what I was saying about French and Spanish. Okay, and so the same thing for Serbian or Serbo-Croat, or what is that? What you speak?
Serbo-Croatian, Serbian, yes.
Right. So,
but I would use the same word in interpretation. So that probably is what. If you were going into your A,
of course, it wouldn't matter if you were going into A is your mother tongue, B is an active foreign language, and if you were going into a foreign language like English, it would be useful to know this. But going into your mother tongue, the problem wouldn't have arisen, right? But you learned a point of English there, right?
I think that word caught my ears because of my background, because I work for the intelligence community, strategic language. I teach the foreign service officers and the other agencies, orientation course and the language, but those two words are so critical because of the terrorist stuff. So that probably caught my attention more. Otherwise, probably it wouldn't even have got my attention. So.
It's an excellent point of English. It's super important for the reason you just said. But let's move on. You mentioned the two boys. Now, the whole idea here is to improve. So it's true. As a speaker, I can confirm that there were two boys, not one. So, Dragoslava, and this is as a demonstration. I want you all to see what we're doing here. Dragoslava, what happened? Take a look in your notes. First of all, well, take a look in your mind. Did you hear that there was one boy or two boys?
Right now, I don't even know.
Okay.
I can't even recall.
Well, then let's
trying to find in
assume,
my notes.
I think that we would, well, if that's what you said, I have an impression that that's probably what you deduced from what you heard. So in other words, that's what you understood. Now, yeah, please do find it in your notes if you can, because that's the whole idea here. Yeah.
Yes, I just wrote, go to another end of island. System for dispute, send to another end of island. So I did not even note whether it was one or two. I just jotted down that the punishment for a dispute would be being sent to another part of the island.
Yeah, this is a very minor point because, in my view, because you got the essential, but it was two, so there is a problem. We want to be super accurate, and it was off enough for someone to notice it, and I think people might notice that it was two, and how would you? Okay, I have a theory about what happened. You were writing, and you got the idea that somebody had to go to but there was so many more words coming, and you're so preoccupied by the next thing you have to write that you didn't really perhaps listen enough to ingrain in your mind that it was both boys being sent to opposite ends of the island. Is that
right.
possible?
I was focusing on the method of punishment. That was where my focus was, writing down that the system for dispute was set so that the offender was sent to be alone on the other end of the island, mull over his behavior.
Right.
All that stuff was happening in my head. So that is what I was focusing on, and missed the number of.
That's why I say you got the essential, because if it was one would be sent. If it was two, we can assume two would be sent. So you're getting the essential. However, you, in a really, really, really demanding situation, by the way, your interpretation was pretty much professional standard. You would probably pass most exams, in my opinion. So let me just tell you, it was very good, but it could be better. So I think you would. But the whole purpose of being here is to find out why. And
yes,
do you, because you want to get it next time, right?
Right.
And so we want to figure out what happened. What is so common is that it's just going by too fast, and our mind for an instant thinks about the notes, and for that instant doesn't focus on what's being said. Do you think that might have happened?
Right. I was focusing on the process and comprehending the process and jotting down the process, and not focus on the words said.
Okay. So let me just reassure you.
Judging by the notes.
Right.
That's what I'm, thinking.
It's by looking into this that we improve. It's just like when you learned your foreign languages. It's by analyzing. Of course, this takes time. It's when you rode a bicycle, when you learned how to drive a car, etc. Same thing. You had to decompose everything. Okay, yes. I have to turn the signal and then turn this, and I have to watch the light going on and off. It's all so very complicated. But by thinking it through over and over, it becomes so familiar and becomes so automatic that it becomes easier. And so that's why I want you to go through this analysis. So what happened is you probably suspended listening for an instant. You really did catch the essence, but there was a small thing that you didn't catch. Now, we want to catch everything. So yeah, so again, it was excellent, but we are doing this as a demonstration. We want always, we always want to look at what happened. And generally what's happening almost all the time as we're taking notes is that we're struggling between part of our minds figuring out what to write and the other part of our mind is listening. And we're not managing that well yet. And I can tell you it comes with practice. Just like, you know, when you learned English, to conjugate I go, you go, he goes, you have to put an S after he goes.
Right.
You know, the first time you said he go, and then someone says that's not right. And then what do you know? A few months later, you're just saying it naturally. This is what will happen through this kind of practice. So I wanted to do this demonstration of how we go about it. I wanted to give you this encouragement about, it's actually largely a matter of practice. There are all kinds of techniques though also, all kinds of techniques about, you know, virtual columns, about writing diagonally, about separating the ideas out and all that. That's something maybe we'll talk about another day. But the main thing for now is practice. Now, if everyone is good with this, I'm going to give the follow-up to that speech, and we're all going to go into our breakout rooms, okay? So get your pen and paper ready, and when I finish, I will place you all in a breakout room, and you will be with one other person. Please do your interpretation. The other person, please give your feedback. And, you know, this is kind of hard for me to manage because there's so many rooms and I'm going from room to room, and some rooms take longer. If you finish and you try to go in the other direction, there's nothing wrong with doing it. So both of you can do the interpretation and get feedback from the other one. Of course, the second interpretation benefits from the first one, so it should be a little bit better, right? So here we go. So there is this assumption that people, if you gave them a guaranteed income, they would waste it. You only appreciate what you work for, supposedly, right? So people say that people will waste it. They'll buy alcohol and whatever. They will not learn to appreciate the money if they get free money. But let me go back in time, because there's actually, behind all of this talk, there is a debate launched long ago, at least in Western society, by two philosophers. One was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a French philosopher who, and I'm going to boil it down, he would probably say, no, that's way oversimplified. I never said that. But it's essentially human beings, when they were in small bands of hunter-gatherers before the pyramids, before civilization, before the agriculture, before standing armies and huge cities. In other words, the noble savage, the natural man, was peaceful and inclined to cooperate and work together with his fellow men. Sorry, I'm using a bit of old language about using men all the time. It's women. There was another philosopher, Hobbes, an English philosopher, who had the opposite take. Mankind is bad. Mankind is naturally lazy, violent, and greedy. And if left to their own devices, people will fight and destroy each other. It's only thanks to civilization that there is any hope of order and prosperity. And this has been called the veneer theory, which means there is this thin veneer, a thin covering of civilization, which is keeping everything intact. If you stripped away that veneer, if you stripped away this thin cover of civilization and left human nature naked to its own devices, people would be fighting and killing and stealing and you would have mayhem. So you have these two opposite points of view. My point of view is that it's somewhere in the middle, but it's actually leaning much more towards Jean-Jacques Rousseau, because I think that the evidence shows that, as we saw in the case of the boys on the island. And there are many, many other examples. Let me give you another example. When the Europeans discovered, well, let me back up a second. Easter Island used to be inhabited. And as we know, there are these huge statues on Easter Island, and there's a huge mystery about who created these statues. And up until only a few years ago, the theory was that the people on that island had had a terrible fight. They had actually chopped down too many trees, and so food became scarce, and they started warring with each other at opposite ends, had different bands at opposite ends of the island. And there were even stories about a mound where the bodies were all buried, and it had been a terrible tragedy. And they even had some people trying to pinpoint the year when this took place. And that's how the people there disappeared. They cut down too many trees to create these statues because they would roll them on the logs, and they ran out of trees, and the land became barren. They started to starve, and so they all fought each other and they perished. So this is basically the Hobbes view. People are greedy and foolish, and they fight, and they will, without civilization, they will destroy each other. Well, Rutger Bregman, I'm going to speak in the third person now, he did some research, and he found out that actually this is not what happened at all. And that story has been repeated from historian to historian, each one quoting the other, down through the last few decades. But in the last 10 years or so, it's been discovered that it's absolutely not true. What happened is a slave ship landed on the island, gathered up forcibly all the people, took them to Peru, where they were enslaved, and most of them died. So, okay, I'm now going to take a step further in my theory. Now, this is sort of the David Violet theory building on the Rutger Bregman theory. Basically, if you can cover up your crimes by saying it's the people themselves who are bad and they are the ones who are leading to their own demise, not only you come across as innocent, but you come across as necessary. So what I'm saying is the powerful aristocrats, and today the huge capitalists, would say, without us, it would be chaos. We are keeping this veneer of civilization on because people are so bad, they would be at each other's throats if it weren't for the police that we organize and everything organized to suppress human beings' violent nature. Whereas in fact, says David Violet, they are organizing everything so that they can get richer and richer and extract more and more wealth out of those people that they are saying have such an evil nature. So I will stop now for interpretation. We will break into rooms. Please try to complete your notes so that you get the last part. The last part is often a little problem for all of us. You will find yourself, let's see, we are 18, so I'm going to create, that includes me, so I'm going to create 8 rooms. Some of you may find yourselves in a room with 2 others, but most of you will find yourselves in a room with 1 other person. So let's see if I can. And when you see a sign come up saying, come back to the main room, it'll generally say, I think it says in 60 seconds, you'll be automatically put back in the main room. And, but just go ahead and come back as soon as you're ready. So here we go. We've got 2 to most rooms. And please do one of you an interpretation and get feedback. And then if you have time, another do an interpretation and get feedback. So here we go.